Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest is Suzanne Mercier. Suzanne, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
We have had a delightful time on the before we hit the camera, just catching up old times, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but it's amazing how many ways that, as you said, the universe connects the dots. So I want to hear all about you and share your bio and your backstory with our Rising Tide audience.
Fabulous, thank you. Okay, so I came out to Australia quite young. I was a 10-pound pom, as they used to call them. We came out when I was about 7 years old. And my parents had come, my father was Irish, my mother was English. And my mother was born in Reigate, Surrey, which is where the first dot from the universe came, because that's a part of the world that you have a great connection with. Is that not right?
Absolutely. Lived there 9 years. Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
So funny. So we came out to Australia. My parents, I hadn't even thought about this, but thank you for giving me that perspective. My parents were early entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They moved to a place called Lord Howe Island, which is about 270 miles off the coast of New South Wales, which is one of the biggest states in Australia. And they bought into the island. They were the first non-islanders to buy in, and they bought a guest house, or they bought a property and they built a guest house. So they ran that guest house for probably for about 3-4 years. And but during that time, I took my schooling by correspondence. And by the time I hit the age to go into high school, they thought they'd better come back to Australia. So they did, and settled down into more normal type jobs. And at about 19, I made the decision. And about 20, I had enough money in my pocket to get on a ship and go to England. So I went in and met up with my family that I hadn't seen, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and those, and my cousins. And so that was a wonderful trip. And I stayed there for a couple of years, worked in London, and had a fabulous time. And then a friend of mine said, "Oh, I've just heard about this idea that you can go and live in Germany, and that you can work for the American Army in Germany." So off I went to Germany. No job. This is what you do when you're young, isn't it? I loved it. No job. And I wound up working as a court reporter for the American Army. So I wound up traveling all around Germany, working with what they called the Civilian Appellate Review Committee, looking at the grievances or the concerns that people who were not Army, but who supported the Army, were experiencing, and worked with that.
Okay.
So that was and that's where I met my first husband, who was American. And then came to live in the States. So that's a bit of my background, but I wound up working for a law firm in Atlanta, and then I wound up coming back to Australia and studying marketing. So I went back to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved marketing because I'm one of those people who's got an intense curiosity about people, and to dance around in somebody's mind, not to be disrespectful, but just to explore and to think about how do people see things, why do they do what they do, has been both a blessing and probably a bit of an annoyance to people around me. But I've always been intensely curious. So it was just a perfect area for me to get involved with. And I moved from marketing, fast-moving consumer goods marketing with Schwarzkopf into advertising. And I worked with Australia's largest agency, which was George Patterson Advertising, which was part of the Ted Bates and the Saatchi network. And for my sins, I became the first female director on the board.
Wow.
Which was interesting. I never really understood why. Thank you. Yeah, but this was really interesting because I never really understood why. I didn't think I deserved it. I didn't think I knew what I was doing. And when I walked away from the agency, I did because I just didn't think I could keep up the charade anymore. But what I found out later was that I had been experiencing something called the Imposter Syndrome. And so I then, when I found out what that term was, I realized that's what I'd been doing. So I wound up going back and studying a bit more of psychology and trying to understand what was going on here, and worked my way through it as best I can. I can't say it's gone completely, but it's pretty much gone. And then thought, well, hang on a second, 70% of people experience this. Maybe I need to have a look at how can I help other people not give up what I gave up, because I thought I wasn't good enough. So that was where I spent a lot of my time. I did, before that, run an advertising agency myself and a few other things. But probably the crux of where I am now comes from that recognition that I had been playing very small. So I've been working in that space. I've run several businesses. I ran a network for small businesses called Bite Size Skills. I ran a marketing consultancy. I ran an advertising agency called Creative Campaign. So I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur, although perhaps not in the way that most people would talk about that. Like, I built this business and sold it. That's not what I did.
Mm-hmm.
What I did was I had this idea that I had to be unique in the market. And when other people started to play, and for some reason, I was able to pick things ahead of time.
Right.
I think that's
Right.
probably
That's a
from the
skill.
marketing and advertising. Well, it's also a pattern recognition. You know, you see things coming together and you think, hang on a second, this might work. And so I was able to do that. But what I didn't realize was how to package myself early enough to ride that wave, if you know what I mean, to go all the way through. But I think that that I was working in the space of personal branding 20 something years ago, working in the space of values and culture and things like that quite some time ago, but I walked away from them. So the understanding about the imposter syndrome really gave me a perspective on that, so I could see why I had been doing what I've been doing. And I thought about all the times that these businesses could have been much more successful than they were, and they were fine. I lived okay, but I never actually reproduced the salary that I had earned at George Pat's, which was a pretty significant salary.
When you,
so,
let me cut in real quick
yeah,
here,
of course.
because I'm trying to put two pieces. I'm trying to have a pattern recognition here. So
Yep.
when I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I looked at like your experience, there's a number of different companies that, you know, were started and they may have run for 2 years or 3 years or a year and a half or whatever it was. And then there's another one. Was that, I mean, you talked about the imposter syndrome, but was that also, you know, what were the reasons that you would move from company to company? Was it when, did you kind of touched on a little bit, did you see competition coming in? You thought, okay, now it's time to do something else? Or what was the impetus for continuing to change, other than the fact you're just like the early stage startup?
Well, I did recognize that was where my talent was, rather than necessarily the day-to-day detail. So that was interesting. But you can get past that with you know, support and staff. I don't mean psychological support. I mean virtual
operational
support. Operational support. Thank you. So they were all my businesses, and there were various reasons. But the Bite Size Skills, for example, I took on the wrong partner. So that was a situation where it was just untenable. And we had done a values check. We'd sat down and talked to each other and wound up realizing that, or we thought we were on the same page, but we weren't at all. So that was a really big lesson for me. We wound up splitting, and the business just went under, just folded. Whereas we were about to roll it out into franchises. So that was disappointing.
Yeah.
But a big lesson. The other ones were me thinking that what I was offering wasn't good enough. And when the competition came in, as you suggested, or when other people started to do the same thing, I thought that I was supposed to be unique in the market. And if other people were doing the same thing, then that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And I don't even understand how I came up with that brilliant conclusion. But I think that I interpreted signs incorrectly. I think that at that stage it was like, oh, okay, well, this isn't going as fast as I thought it would, or where I thought it would, or maybe I'm better off over here. Shiny new object syndrome comes to mind.
Absolutely. And it could be part of the imposter syndrome as well. I mean, it could be another facet of if you think my products aren't good enough, my services are not up to scratch because of the competition's better, that type of thing. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, so certainly with the one exception where I think that's just like the partnership choice, that's something that a lot of people encounter.
Yeah,
I think the imposter syndrome is too, and self-sabotage comes in a lot of different ways. So I certainly was self-sabotaging. So I wound up understanding what that was all about, and developed, or I guess deconstructed the processes that I had used to get me through that, and to start to build a lot more self-esteem, and to start to recognize my value, to let go of perfection, to recognize that mistakes are just feedback, and it doesn't mean I'm not good enough. It doesn't mean I'm not worthy, because it's such a primal thing. It comes back to self-worth, and thinking that you have to be perfect to be worthy of love and affection and recognition and acceptance and those sorts of things sit behind a lot of the sabotage that so many of us go through.
Right.
So that was pretty powerful recognition. So I then packaged everything up, and I started marketing, and I got a heap of publicity because it was a fairly, not that the subject was new, but bringing it into business and connecting it with business. And in Australia, it wasn't a big thing at all. Nobody really knew about it. So I had a big market, education piece to do. And I wound up appearing on ABC Radio National, which is ABC, BBC, that sort of network. Lots of the newspapers. I think I was even published in Canada a couple of times. So I got some pretty big profile from it. And I kept trying to commercialize it, but nobody wanted it. So it was like, I certainly got some products off the line, and I wound up working with CSIRO, which is a big semi-government agency in Australia, dedicated to research and marine research and that sort of thing, weather patterning, big issues. I wound up working with some of the universities. I wound up getting quite a bit of coaching with senior executives who really didn't want to talk about what was actually going on, but were definitely feeling that feeling of not being good enough and starting to see that they were sabotaging their own careers. So that was great.
Right.
But then, of course, everybody started to get on the same bandwagon. And I had kind of lost heart. I don't know if any of your startups go through this, but essentially I'd really given it everything, and I still couldn't get the traction. And I'm a big one for taking personal responsibility, and I just couldn't see how I could commercialize it. Around the same time as I started working on the imposter syndrome, I started working on purpose as well, because the interesting thing about purpose is that purpose can get me past that feeling of not being good enough.
For sure.
Because I come from a much bigger, you would know that, come from a much bigger perspective where I recognize that my role here is to be of service, and how can I be of service? And so I started to see that was probably the best path through. So I started to do a lot more work around purpose, and that I love, because it lit me up. It just, so my purpose for my business and for the work that I do is to bring more heart and soul into business, because we spend so much time there, and in larger businesses particularly, but in smaller businesses as well. We might work for people that don't necessarily respect us the way that we could, or we might not work in an environment that lets us really be who we can be and show up the way that we want to. And we fear, and when we fear, we pull back and we don't perform the way that we could. So this whole thing ties into so many performance metrics, if you like.
And they're tied together. I mean, those two things are, I mean, it's kind of like what is the natural outcome of, or how do you overcome the imposter syndrome is, how do you figure out what your purpose is, or as Simon Sinek might say, what your why is, type thing. So let's you and I hop on the lift right now. We're gonna step on the as the Yanks would say, the elevator. We're going to go up 10 floors. You've got a minute. Give me your best business elevator pitch on your product or service that you have today.
Yeah, well, I help primarily female entrepreneurs and small business owners really recognize the gold that they bring, really recognize the value that they have, how that can make a difference, help them really increase their self-worth so that they can go out and build fabulous businesses, fabulous communities, and really make the difference that they're driven to make. So that's kind of where my heart is. I work with other people as well, but that's where my heart is.
So if I'm a business owner, how do I measure the ROI, the bottom line ROI of that? Like it seems very much intangible. What's the tangible outcome? I mean, I know there's obviously an increase. There's obviously an effect on the bottom line, but how do you measure that, or how do you overcome that in my mind if I'm a business owner?
Well, purpose is an organizing principle. If I take it into a different kind of language, it means that if I have a purpose in my business, it is the whole the principle through which everything is organized, aligned. So purpose leads to my vision. My vision is actually, how do I bring my purpose alive right now?
Right.
And if I want to make a difference in the world, my business has to be sustainable. It has to make a profit. Hence the business name, Purpose to Profit.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that the only sustainable business comes through purpose and being of service, because all the research that I've seen now, and there's plenty of it now, which is fabulous, talks about how purpose leads to high levels of engagement, high levels of customer loyalty, higher levels of profitability. So everything leads to bottom line.
Yeah.
So the first sign would be that somebody is feeling more inspired, because the feeling is the lead indicator. And when they're feeling more inspired, then the challenges that come up in the business are just that. They're not roadblocks. They're just, okay, how do I solve this? We get to be more resilient and resourceful because we're here to make this happen, because we've got such a big reason for it to happen. And there's so many inspiring people that have talked about this, starting with Viktor Frankl.
Right.
And Simon Sinek is from the advertising industry like me. So we all were working around that
Mm-hmm.
as brand purpose and things like that. But he's taken it bigger than that, which is fabulous. And I love the fact that he's got more people talking about that. And I think the time has come for us to really start living our businesses this way. And I think this coronavirus time is a reset button. It's like
funny
time
you
for us
mentioned
to stop
Viktor
and think.
Frankl. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I
Yes,
literally was listening to Man's Search for Meaning
I love it.
audio earlier today. I mean, I literally was listening to that while I was doing something else and just kind of playing in the background. And
Yeah.
I love the point you made a minute ago about you used the word sustainable.
Yes.
If you look at, and I've asked this question to I've interviewed 150, different startup founders, and I'm thinking, I've asked a number of them, how important is being passionate about what you do, having purpose in that type of thing? How important is that? And it's amazing that 2/3 of them would say it is absolutely vital. Then you have the other third that maybe they're the left brain side that says, I don't care what I'm selling, because at the end of the day, it's business. I just love the game. I love the hunt or whatever. And I'm a little bit like, and I think, just kind of looking in your eyes right now, I'm a little bit more like you. I think it is extremely important because it is what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Money is not a great long-term motivator.
No, and it is important, because if we don't have money, then we can't do the work.
Absolutely.
So it's the balance, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
finding. And I think one of the things that I talk to my clients about is that we actually get paid in many different currencies. And I think it's really important for us to understand the currencies that we get paid in, because that may or may not serve us. But certainly, I think what you're talking about when you talk about the entrepreneurs, startups that you've talked about, I've sort of looked at what's the definition of an entrepreneur. And I think I use that term, people out in the market use that term quite broadly, because I think they use it for anybody who starts a business. But the 1/3 that you're talking about that are not fired up by something, they're probably just business startups.
Business owners, that's a great distinction. That is a great distinction.
And look, if something happened and they couldn't sell this, they'd go and sell that. If something happened to my business, a little part of me would die, and the rest of me would say, okay, now what? How can I bring this alive now in this, with all that's going on? How can I shift? How can I pivot? Which is what many of us are doing at the moment.
Business owners would open a guest house in Australia or in Cornwall. Entrepreneurs open a big guest house on Lord Howe Island.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for that distinction when we had our earlier conversation. That was just wonderful. I never saw my parents that way. That was lovely.
It's a legacy. It's in your DNA. That's exactly right. And it's really interesting because, looking back, I think sometimes we almost look at it in a punitive manner that says, well, I switch jobs every 2 years, or I start a company and I get bored with it, or I move on to something else, or circumstances have that. Sometimes that's okay. If that's where you are most gifted, in the initial startup launch, get it rolling phase, and then hand it off to someone. It doesn't have to be a 7-figure exit. It could be just a transition. But that's okay, because as long as you're paying your bills and you see purpose in this and you are driven by this and get you out of bed, to me, that is just I love just the game of business, the game of startup. Just the whole thing. And it's just an interesting take. But you mentioned a second ago too about the kind of the current time we're in, and I really wanted to give you some space to kind of, you know, expand on that, really head in whatever direction you wanted to head. But I would really like you to, you know, somewhere in that, you know, whatever you're going to say, talk to like founders that are kind of floundering right now, you know, that might be listening to this and having a difficult time, you know, give them a little bit of hope in this as well. But you can cover whatever you want to, but it's just such a broad topic, but it's so timely for today.
Yeah, it is. It's, I actually think it's a magical time. And I know I don't mean any disrespect to anybody whose lives have been touched by that at all. And I think many people have. I don't personally know anybody who has, so I'm very blessed. But so I don't mean any disrespect at all.
I don't either, none taken this.
Yeah, thank you. I think if we're talking about entrepreneurs, what we've got in Australia, we're self-isolated. I think you are too, aren't you? You're not quarantined yet, but you're self-isolated. So we've got this time where the pause button is kind of put on, and it's not that we aren't having to pay our bills. We've been given in Australia some support, which is lovely. And it still doesn't mean that we don't have to get out there and try and do so what we need to do to move past this. I think that we're going to see some major changes, and I've been very heartened by walking around and seeing the kindness with which people are treating each other. There was a very nasty, there was a lot of in the media, and I don't know how nasty it was in actuality, but there were a lot in the media about people blaming others for bringing the coronavirus. And I think that there has been a nasty backlash from that. That seems to be got. I didn't see any of that. And I live in an area that's very diverse, which is wonderful. And there's so many acts of kindness and so many people that are willing to smile, and a smile changes everything. So I'm seeing that, and I think that's wonderful. So what I'm seeing is that people are extending to each other warmth and kindness and compassion and love. We're all connected. So that's the first thing I'm seeing. The second thing I'm seeing is that with that, there are a lot of people that are willing to help each other. And I think that I've had an informal mentor, and I've got a formal mentor as well. And the informal mentor is a gentleman who's retired, and he's just wonderful. And he just loves being involved in the game, but I think he also wants to see me be more successful. So find somebody who has the skills and capability and who would love to be involved. I do that in turn for some other people. I'm working with some people in exchange for equity, and I love that. It's wonderful. So find somebody who might be willing to help you, who's got the skill set that you need, who believes in you. But first, you've got to believe in yourself. And I think that's the thing. So for you to find your purpose, you need to recognize the value that you bring. So you need to see your strengths, and don't worry about your weaknesses unless they're going to derail you. We've all got weaknesses. None of us is perfect, far from it. And that's part of what makes us amazing. So, you know, it's more, have a look at what it is that you bring, and who you serve, and what pain you help solve. So if people are in pain, what do you do? And that's another word for the experience of a problem, obviously. But when you look at what you bring, how do you help people? Because if you can start to come from that, and you can start to feel that what you're doing makes a difference, then you will be inspired. When you're inspired, other people are inspired. I mean, I've had so many situations. When I started Bite-Sized Skills, it was a long time ago, so forgive me. It was the paper world, not the digital world at that stage. And I was doing a launch, and I had bought a database, and I had 5 pieces of paper to be folded and shoved into an envelope with a label and a stamp and that sort of thing. I'm so old school. And so, but it was the way we did it then. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I was talking to people about what I was up to, and people said, "Oh, I've got 2 hours. Can I come and help you?" So I had this little production line. My parents even came up from 3 hours away and sort of got on the end of the production line, and everybody helped me. And so it got done. So if you let people know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you're fired up about it, and ask for help, because there's no shame in asking for help. I know many of us think that we should be able to do it ourselves, but we are all in this together. So if they buy what you, and I mean buy emotionally, connect with what you're offering, your purpose, your reason for doing what you're doing, you will have support.
Wow.
And if you just ask for it.
What a great way to kind of wrap up our chat today. I'm curious, how has it affected your business in, specifically? I mean, what have you seen, and I guess maybe one or two steps you've taken to kind of, shift
Yeah,
or pivot
sure.
or whatever in the midst of this, even yourself, that might be, a good lesson for someone else.
Oh, absolutely. I lost 3/4 of my business in 2 hours.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was interesting because most of my business was face to face, and for the
Hmm.
last 2 years, I've been looking to bring my business online. But of course, the day-to-day work was a challenge. That was where I put my attention because they were already paying me. This was
Right.
speculative, not speculative, but
Exactly.
it was developmental.
Yeah.
And so I wound up thinking. I think I felt down for about 2 hours. I've got an incredible resilience, and it was like, okay, what now? And I knew that I would be fine. I always have been. I'm fortunate in that I'm an oldie and I've gone through these dips before.
Mm.
And I know there's another side. And I know that what I'm doing is, at least for me and for many people, I hope, adding value. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, how do I do it now? So what it's caused me to do is accelerate my my online business. So I ran
Hmm.
a 5-day resilience challenge last week. I found that my database was filled with people who were probably working from home, and I thought there were more entrepreneurs in my database. So that was interesting. But essentially, I learned some lessons from that. The timings didn't work, but the content was great, so I got the content out there.
Hmm.
So it's just like learning and taking the feedback and saying, okay, that didn't work. Now, what do I need to learn from that? So I have a very formal reflection process where I pull apart all the elements that were involved in the campaign and look at where people dropped off and where do I need to go
Yeah,
to
that's good.
work that out, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm very quick to reflect, and I'm also now so much better at not taking it personally. It's not about me. It's about the timing. It's about the offer. It's about the cost, or it's about whatever. I'm able to pull it apart, and I don't take it personally anymore, which means that I'm so much more resilient and able to handle that. So for me, what this all means is that my business is going online, and I think what's going to be fascinating is to see what businesses come out of this time, because in the 2008 financial crisis,
Hmm.
was it Dropbox and WhatsApp and a couple of other, Slack, I think, and a few other businesses came out of that time.
Unicorns, not small ones. I mean,
Unicorns,
major
yeah, for
unicorn. Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So what's going to come out of this time? And I think that's going to be fascinating, because if the world of meeting virtually is as it is, are we going to have virtual reality meeting rooms and things like that? I mean, it's going to be fascinating. I don't
Yeah.
know where it's going to go. I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time.
Well, it is. It's going to be interesting to see. I think it's going to take a few months to
Oh,
kind of
yes. Yes.
manifest itself, and maybe a year from now it might take that long to
Yeah.
fully come full circle. But I'm absolutely with you. I think this is an incredible time of opportunity,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the the way that you kind of cast vision for us. And so as we wrap up today, so tell me, we were talking a little bit off camera. You've got some things that you're going to launch the next two or 3 weeks, and probably about the time
Yes.
this episode goes live. So kind of wrap up with that, and maybe the best place that people can find you online.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of stuff that's out there for free at the moment online. So what I wanted to do was to do something a bit different. I'm really looking at mindset and how mindset and purpose and personal brand help build us and help prepare us for what opportunities may be coming
Hmm.
ahead. So that's what I'll be putting up fairly shortly, with a couple of things. And if anybody wants anything from me in terms of the the entrepreneurial space and things like that, I've got a heap of free books I'm happy to give away. But essentially, I really would like to take people on a journey. This is such a great time for us, and if we make it important, we've only got now, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So if we can make it important to invest a little bit in ourselves, time, whatever you can manage, time, a little bit of money, whatever it is, to help you prepare to really look at the opportunities, find the opportunities, see how you can capitalize on the opportunities. Right. Then that's what I'd like to be of service with.
Well, we will certainly make sure that if you send me links, we'll make sure they get in the show notes, so people that see the episode can see those notes. But Suzanne, it's just been a pleasure to connect with you tonight, and I guess this morning your time, and
yes.
Just hear your story and backstory, and just the the experiences and the different, you know, industries you've been in and the different ways you've kind of looked at business and navigated those, and as you're navigating today, and really just the leaving us with, you know, a hopeful vision at the end of this chat about, you know, this too shall pass, you know, mentality, and what can you do right now to get better. But just thank you again for just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Suzanne, have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much, Kevin. Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.